And when I say cis or cisgendered, this refers to someone whose anatomy matches their gender expression, so an alternative to transgender. Right, so we're still pretty much talking about gay men and lesbians, maybe a few bisexuals thrown in there. You know. Anyway, so Melinda Lowe writes that this year she noticed that several of the LGBTYA books had characters who were not only LGBT, but also people of color or disabled, or also disabled. So this sense of intersectionality that we can have more than one identity factor at a time. At least, get this, at least 15 of the 43 YA novels feature characters who have intersectional identities, so 35%. So, and I know Mei Li is going to speak to that as well. So, all of that, well, that seems a little sad. In some ways, though, it's still incredible to me that we're having this conversation about queer young adult lit at all. I mean, this is really actually quite exciting. If we think about queer literature itself, for all people, its availability has increased along a chronology similar to that of young adult lit, so since early 20th century. In many libraries, even when I was young, one of the only representations of experience recognized as lesbian was Radcliffe Hall's The Well of Loneliness. And as you may guess from the title, the lesbians do not fare very well. So it's pretty bleak. So while we're talking about 1% to 2% of the entire YA literature market is an improvement, it's still a little sad, right? When we remember that this is really only about 40-something books. So I offer two more things. One is a reminder of what Bell Hooks calls the oppositional gaze, or the coping mechanism she developed as a young African-American girl in a time when the only representations of blackness on TV were of Buckwheat and Amos and Andy. Right? The oppositional gaze is a way to engage critically when the mainstream culture is not faithfully representing your own experiences. It is a way of looking and observing with a critical eye. So as readers, we can read critically, look back, and talk back, as Bell Hooks recommends. As scholars, we also need to place these issues in the forefront of our conversations. Kate Capshaw, who is a prominent children's literature scholar, challenges other scholars to critically engage. She writes, "What I want to add to the conversation is a call for our scholarship, for our work as teachers and within institutions to grow. We are in a place where, especially in terms of race in the US, our scholarship is bereft, where there is only one major critical article on Walter Dean Myers' book, Monster, a smattering of work on Virginia Hamilton, and relatively little on the great bodies of Asian American and Latina children's literature, despite all of the awards and accolades these texts and writers have received. Child readers suffer from a lack of books, and we suffer from a lack of scholarship that can filter down into our classrooms to feed our students and their students. Our field is tied to feminist studies, queer studies, cultural studies, and other formations that resulted from thoughtful interrogation of the academy and its limits. Let's make diversity a more difficult, uneasy, contestatory site in the academy." So that's Kate Capshaw. So we as teachers and scholars need to engage, and that brings us to the writers. Both Nina and Mei Li contribute to this genre and are part of this improving movement. And I think our liaison, our middleman, so to speak, is Christopher Rhodes. So with that, I'll pass this along.
Hi, I'm Christopher Rhodes. I wish I had prepared something as wonderful as that to talk about, but I think that I can wing it okay. Does everyone know what an agent does? Is there confusion about that? Should I explain it? Okay, Mei Li is saying yes. So a literary agent serves as a liaison between the writer and the publisher or the editor of a particular work. A lot of an agent's job is tied up in editorial, tied up is the wrong word, it's a pleasure to serve in the role of editorial and kind of development of projects. An agent very much does not judge a book by a cover, he judges or she judges a book by its content, because that's what we're looking at, that's what we're shaping, and that's what we're thinking about. So you send a query to an agent, they like the idea, they like the writing, they decide to work on it with you. They call you up and they say, would you like me to represent this book? And you always say yes. And then that's when the real work begins. I always suggest that clients or potential clients should never send a query to an agent for we'll talk about fiction only in this in the circumstance, should never send a manuscript that isn't finished in their mind. It should be 100% complete as far as the writer is concerned. Then the news is it's not complete at all, and then the agent and the agent and the writer go back and they work through the project to make it perfect in the agent's mind, ready to submit to editors. And then the agent sends out the project and hopefully gets some bids from publishing houses. Its agent's job is to negotiate that world of editors and publishers, so a lot of my job is networking. I lived in New York for many years. I live here now, but I go back to New York 4 times last year to meet with clients that live there. It's a central location to meet people, and then mostly to meet with editors and develop relationships. Agents are taken out to lunch by editors to talk about book projects, or coffee. Depends how important you are of an agent. So, I am looking for mostly, in the fiction world, I'm looking for really character-driven literary stories that are driven by voice. And in my experience, I receive about 45 to 50 queries a week. Most of them, I would say about 85 to 90% of them, I just miss out of hand because they're just crazy people querying an agent, or in their mind they think that they're ready to submit a book, but they're just not. I look at credentials before I read anything else. Where have they published? Who else has put confidence behind this writing? But once I get past that, once I get past the query and I look at the sample pages, what I'm looking for most of all is a voice, is a really, really strong narrative voice. And I am very interested as a gay male literary agent, I'm not the only one, in supporting and developing projects that are diverse. I have 2 young adult projects right now. I mostly do adult, but I'm dying to work in the young adult market. And I have 2 young adult projects that I'm shopping right now. None of them have a gay character anywhere between the pages. But one of them is very diverse culturally. It's about a UNCW Indian boy, which is a class of I don't know what you call it, a tribe of Indians, thank you. I'm gonna get in trouble here. A tribe of Indians that is not typically written about. And the other one is just a kind of typical high school love story that I'm really just drawn to the writing, and I'm just in love with the book and the story. And that is interesting because that young adult project is a book that is geared towards males. And Katie brought up the fact that who reads books, who read books post-World War II, and who reads books now in the young adult market. And it's women, it's girls. They say that movies are made for 14-year-old boys and books are written for 14-year-old girls. That is a broad generalization, but it's important to look at because my other job as an agent is not just to take on projects that I'm in love with. I wish that I could do that. I won't take on a project that I'm not in love with, but I have to make sure that the projects that I take on that I'm in love with have an audience. And the truth of the matter is, selling a book to a male teenage audience is really, really difficult. I've chosen to take on that project because I so believe in the writing and I so believe in the story. I was interested in what Katie said about our job as educators and our job. It's just, I can't articulate it as well as she did, but it's interesting to me that the market only responds to what the market is given. And so, it's hard to, who's to say that there's not a market for these books that are written for gay and lesbian youth? Just because they're not selling is because they're not being published, you know? And how do we educate? And that's why this panel is so very important. And I agree with Katie that even just a few years ago, in North Carolina anyways, and I mean, it was culture shock for me moving to North Carolina from New York City because of the way that gay issues are handled here. It's very, you don't even think about it in New York, you know? It's just, everyone's gay and that's just the way it is. But here, you know, I can't imagine having this panel in Randall Library even when I first got here 5 years ago. So I think that we're definitely moving in an amazing direction, that we're able to talk about this. I take about 40 queries a week. and I'm actively looking for young adult fiction. And I have never received a query that had a gay protagonist, which matches up with your statistics beautifully. In fact, I got a query a couple of weeks ago about a student who was vague about the character sexuality, and I challenged that the writer was vague about it in the query, and I challenged the writer because I had this panel in my mind, and I would love to have come here with a project that was gay related. It didn't happen. But I kind of had to force out of him, like, if there was a gay character in the book. And there was, and it was very stereotypical in my mind. It was a jock who was rumored to be gay and who beat everybody up because he was ashamed of his sexuality. And I'm not interested in that kind of stereotype. And the writing was actually quite good, but I didn't want to put my name on something like that. I'm really interested in finding a character-driven book by a gay person where it's not a big deal, like it's kind of a post-gay society. And I know Nina touches on that in her latest novel. I think as long as we cast the gay roles as victims, we're doing a disservice to our youth. When I was growing up, I can't remember, I loved young adult books, but I can't remember a gay character in any of them. I also want to say, and I'll quit after this, that adult literature, gay themes in adult literature is not it's progressed further than young adult literature, but if we look back at a history, I'm actually reading a fascinating book right now, Eminent Outlaws, have you read it? About gay writers in the 20th century. And it's a pretty new phenomenon that gay writers are able to write about homosexuality without getting flack. And it used to be in the 50s and 60s that they would write about these characters that were sexually ambiguous, that they had sex with men and they had sex with women. And also, as far as lesbian pulp was concerned in the 50s and 60s, books could get published as long as something bad happened to the woman at the end, as long as there was some judgment cast